welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley, and today we're going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of September, and I'll go ahead and warn you, it's going to be a lot, so grab a snack. I don't know what was unleashed in me in September, but this is the month that I have read the most books and graphic novels and things collectively in a very long time. I feel like I really fell in love with reading again in September. I have just been trying to catch up on my TBR and get into a better place where I don't have so many unread books at once, so that when I really get excited about a book, I can buy it and read it all at once really quickly. Or I'm using audiobooks more often, I'm using my library more often, and reading books through Libby, and I just had a really great reading month. I only ended up with a couple new absolute favorite books, and I did have books that I didn't enjoy, but still I just had so much fun reading this month. I was excited about the books I was reading. I was excited about just flying through them and what I was going to read next and just going with the whims of what I wanted to read. And overall, I just had a really fun time. So I'm excited to tell you about all the things that I read in the month of September. We're going to be grouping it along the way. I'm going to generally go from least favorite to most favorite, but I also need to talk about some books that I DNF'd. And then also, I think I'm going to group my graphic novels and manga all together at the beginning too. So we'll go through different sections. But yeah, first, let's talk about the books that I DNF'd this month. So I ended up having 4 DNFs this month, and a lot of those were arcs that I had on NetGalley. I've had a back and forth relationship with NetGalley over the years and requesting arcs. If you're unaware, arcs are advanced reader copies. So NetGalley is just a platform where you can say, hey, I'd love to read this book in advance before it comes out. And they either give it to you or they don't, and you read it. And there's a lot of pressure to read it before the publication date so you can give a review so that your feedback ratio is up, so that you can have a better chance of getting books that you want in the future. And I just have had an on and off again relationship with that. In the past couple of months, I've been using NetGalley a lot. I've been trying to get through books. I've probably been reading around 3 arcs a month on average, which is a lot. And this month I had a lot that I needed to get to because their publication dates were coming up really soon in October, but I just simply didn't want to with some of them. I just decided that I was just going to DNF them, and I think I'm going to be phasing out of using NetGalley as much again in the coming months once I get through my backlog of what I have on there now. Don't think I'm going to be requesting things as often, which also has to do with the fact that I finally got a library card in my new state since I moved a couple months ago, and I'm using Libby a lot more often, and my library is doing a great job with keeping that loaded with new releases. And so I'm really able to use that and then change my mind about if I want to read something or not, instead of feeling this pressure to read it before the release date. So anyway, all that rambly long thing to say, the books that I DNF'd, the first one was the Enigma of Room 522. I thought this one looked really interesting. It has a really cool cover to it. It's set at this luxury hotel area in Switzerland, I think, maybe Sweden, somewhere like that, somewhere near the Swiss Alps. So I think it's Switzerland. It's a mystery story. It's a metafiction. The main character's name is the same name of the author, and they are an author, and they're visiting this hotel and they're exploring this mystery of Room 522, which like doesn't exist or something. I really fully don't even remember. This book was really difficult for me to get into. I tried to read the first couple of chapters. You end up getting pulled into this different story. Didn't fully know what was going on. And then when I talked about this book in a video, probably on my fall TBR video, someone had commented something about people not loving this book. People had a lot of negative feedback towards it, and previously the author had done something really cool and successful, but this one ended up being universally disliked. I cannot remember if they said there was some kind of controversy around it or if it was just that most people weren't liking it. And so then I went to check out the reviews. It was very widely like 1 and 2 stars. People were not enjoying it. So that didn't really make me excited about it. I wasn't really following it, and it's a really long, I'm pretty sure it's over like 500 pages. So I decided to DNF that one. The next one that I DNF'd, I read quite a bit of this one. It's Ghostwritten by Ronald Malfi. This is a collection of 4 horror novellas that are all about cursed books or cursed stories. The first horror novella in this collection I read the entirety of, and I just didn't love the direction it went. I really liked the setup of it. It had some good creepy writing. It was exactly the type of tropiness that I like in horror. I don't mean that it was an overly tropey story. I just enjoyed the tropes that the story was following until it took a turn towards the cursed writing, cursed book thing. And then I realized I don't really think I like stories about cursed books because the more I tried to read the other novellas in this collection, I just wasn't incredibly interested in them, and I just couldn't find myself excited to pick it back up and try to finish them. You would think because it's just 4 novellas, they're all around 100 pages, I think, from what I could tell from the ebook copy, that it would be really easy to quickly fly through them, but I just wasn't into it, and so I didn't force my way through it. I know people really like Ronald Malfi stuff and will probably be excited for this one, so don't want to discourage you from that. And I am still interested in checking out more from this author because this was the first thing I'd ever read from him, and I just didn't really find interest in the subject matter, so I don't think that really says anything to do with if I'm going to enjoy the author or not. So I do want to check out probably Come With Me, I think will be the book that I read from him next, but let me know if if you think there's something that I would enjoy more. The next book I DNF'd was pretty much a book that I barely even started, and that is Little Eve by Katrina Ward. First of all, I lost a lot of excitement around this when I realized that it's just a re-release. I think it was just getting picked up by Tor and they were republishing this, but this book originally came out in 2018. So something about it just not being new, it didn't make it as exciting for me anymore. And when I was reading the first chapter of this one, I just wasn't really digging the writing style. And because I was just trying to have a fun month in September where I was just jumping around and reading what I wanted to read and reading what I was having fun with, which I think ended up being a big success for me, I didn't want to force myself to try to read something that I wasn't enjoying. That doesn't mean I'm never going to pick this story up again. I just think if I were to try it again, I would try it with an audiobook to help me try to get into the story more. But I've also never heard anyone talk about this book. So if you've read it, let me know what you think down below. And the last book that I DNF'd, which is pretty much like a soft DNF, I don't really know if I'm going to pick it up again, but I'm just calling it a soft DNF for now. And that is a horror anthology of short stories that is called Dark Stars. There's a lot of authors I've heard of in this collection and read from before. And then there's also a lot of authors that I had not heard from or had not read from before. So I liked the idea of jumping into this one, but I was looking for more of a thematic tie, I guess, between the stories. If you've been keeping up with me, you know anthologies are not my thing. I have not had success with an anthology yet, but I really love the idea of a horror anthology because I like short horror, like I like horror novellas, so I really keep trying to get into horror anthologies, but I just haven't found one that really works for me yet. I don't even fully remember the concept behind this one. It has something to do with a book that came out a long time ago, maybe in the 80s or something, that was an anthology that they were paying homage to or trying to redo in some way. Basically, all the stories in this one are about monsters in different shapes and forms, sometimes human monsters, sometimes creatures and whatnot. And I just never really enjoyed any of the stories that I was reading in this one. I can't even remember exactly which stories I did read. I know I read the first one by Caroline Kepnes, which I thought was just fine. And then I read Josh Mallerman's in this one. My favorite one that I did complete was the one by the person who put the anthology together. That was the most enjoyable story to me, but even by the ending, I was left feeling unsatisfied with it. So I feel like this is something that if I ever have time for a short story or interest in it, maybe I will pick this back up and try to get through some more of the short stories. I didn't get to Stephen Graham Jones in it, and I wanted to read his short story in there, so I feel like that one I have a good chance of finishing in the future, but overall just wasn't really having fun with it, so didn't want to finish it. I actually started this one in the beginning of August, so it really stretched like 2 months for me, and I was like, all right, Ashley, you're just not gonna finish this one right now. It may be something you pick up in the future, it may not, I don't know, but for now it is going back to my shelves. Next we can talk about the manga and graphic novels that I read this month. I read 1 graphic novel and 3 manga books, which is pretty cool. First I'll start with the manga. The first one I'll talk about is Spy Family Volume 2, which I was going to hold up, but it's really shiny, so I'll just put a picture up here. Can't really say much about it because it's the second volume in a series and don't really have too much more to say about it. I read the first volume, I believe, in August, and I enjoyed that one, but it ended up just being about a 4-star for me. I wasn't falling absolutely in love with it. The idea behind this series is you're following this spy who gets put on a mission. He has to get close to this guy, and the way he's supposed to get close to him is he has to create this fake family, get a fake wife, get a fake daughter, send the daughter to the academy so that she can interact with the guy's son so that he can get close to that guy. When he ends up putting together a fake family, the child he chooses is unknowingly a telepath and the wife he chooses is unknowingly an assassin. So it's like they've all got these secrets and it's just a funny found family dynamic. So I enjoyed the first one but didn't absolutely fall in love with it. And the second book, I started to really fall more in love with this series. I had really fun with it. This was a 5-star for me. Really enjoyed it. And then I picked up volumes 3, 4, and 5, which I have on my shelves, which I'm hoping to get to very soon. I also read my first Junji Ito this month, and I read Uzumaki, which is a story about this town that is haunted by spirals. That sounds kind of confusing if you aren't familiar with Junji Ito's work or this book, and I didn't really know what to expect with this, but this is just the one I see talked about the most when I see people talk about Junji Ito, and people talk about him all the time in the manga community. And I really wanted to get into horror manga because all I've read manga-wise is the Spy Family series, which is not horror, and I really wanted to try something horror, so I jumped right in with Uzumaki, and I had a very, very good time with this. I really just like Junji Ito's sense of storytelling. I read another book from him, which I'll talk about next, and you can see this pattern in his work, how he really just keeps a story going by kind of going off on tangents, but pulling it back together, and I just really thought that was fun. I also found some moments in this just so funny and hilarious. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's really funny that you're just following this girl who's living in this town and all these bad things keep happening, and it's sort of told in chapters that read sort of like short stories because it does like build bigger and bigger in the universe and you meet new characters and things are going on, but you're still following following your main character throughout. And it's just funny how each story would start and she'd be like, yeah, and then one time this crazy thing happened and, you know, we didn't know what was going on. And in the next chapter, she's like, and then one time it was raining and this started to happen. And so it's just funny how she just like continues to relay these stories and continues to stay in this town. And she just has all this madness going on around her. And she's just like, yeah, I don't know what that was all about. That was a kind of crazy time when my hair took over my whole body, like weird. So I really liked just the characters, the story. There was some horrifying imagery in here, which was a lot of fun. And I really did enjoy this one. So I also decided to pick up Censor by Junji Ito, which I actually have not ever heard of this one. I just ended up stumbling across this one in a local comic store in town, and I figured I would pick it up since I had enjoyed something from him before. This is a story about this woman who stumbles upon this area where there are weird things going on in this town that have to do with this golden hair falling from the sky. And from there, she just gets pulled into this turmoil of what's going on in the town, the history behind it. Another character is introduced who's investigating what's going on in the town, and you see how he gets pulled into it as well. And while I found the concept of this one enjoyable and it did have some similar traits to what I enjoyed with Uzumaki, this one I did not end up enjoying quite as much as Uzumaki. It kind of became this bigger thing. There was some spirituality in it, and it felt like a book that was just a little too big for me. And by big, I mean I like stories that are person versus person, person versus self, person versus circumstance going on in their environment. But when it's person against world, that is a little bit too big for me. That's why I don't really read a lot of fantasy or sci-fi, because I feel like that is where that trope tends to be more prevalent. And this book just ended up getting a little bit too big for me to stay fully connected to and enjoy. Still had a good time with it, just not as good as Uzumaki. And then for the one graphic novel that I read this month, I read Little Girls by Nicholas Affleje and Sarah Delane. This is another book that I just stumbled upon when I picked up Censor at a local store. Knew nothing about it, just thought it looked fun and creepy, and I was looking for some books to add into my TBR for the Losers Club readathon, which is a readathon that I helped host in September. And so this was just a good addition to that TBR. I actually did not really end up enjoying this story. It was about this town where hyenas are, is it hyenas? It's two animals. It's lions fighting against another type of animal. I think it's hyenas. These appear to be hyenas, right? Anyways, it's set in Ethiopia. You're following these two girls who are friends, and they're just dealing with all these different things going on with teenagehood. And then meanwhile, this thing is going on in their town where these lions keep getting attacked and dying, and they try to figure out what's going on and then help solve that problem. The story just went by really fast, and it just wasn't super compelling for me, so didn't have a great time with it, but wasn't too big of a loss. I'm always willing to pick up a quick graphic novel. Next, we're gonna move into the novels that I read this month, but before we do that, I should say I've been having these thoughts around my star ratings system and how I want to continue that, or if I want to reevaluate that or kind of figure it out as I go along. And you may have noticed I don't think I've set a star rating for any of these books so far. I did say Spy Family Volume 2 was a 5-star for me, but generally what I've been thinking lately is it's really difficult for me to put a star rating on books a lot of the time, and just with the way I was exploring my reading this month and trying to have more fun with it, I don't really love the pressure of star ratings. I realize it kind of hinders my reading experience a bit, so I'm gonna be a little looser with my ratings. I'm gonna try that for a bit. We'll see how that goes. I'm bringing this up now because the first book that I want to talk about is Tampa by Alyssa Nutting, and this is a book that I did not put a rating on for specific reasons because I found this book very difficult to rate. I truly didn't know what to rate it, but that kind of made me think about how I rate other books, and generally I think I'm going to be a little bit looser, particularly with books that fall in like the 2 to 3 star range. I feel like star ratings can be limiting, and it can also make me a little lazier in explaining books. If I just say 2 stars, I didn't like it, move on. I kind of want to challenge myself to explain more what I did or didn't like about books, and then who I think they'd be good for or who they would not be good for. And the star ratings just give me this thing to lean on instead of doing that. So I'm not going to be giving specific ratings for all these books. I'm going to be talking generally first about this book that I did not rate, and then we're still going to go generally from books that I didn't enjoy to books that I thought were fine to books that I loved. And one of book's a 5-star, and it's a really obvious 5-star. I'm going to tell you that because I feel like that is a little bit different for me, but I'm going to be experimenting with this for a while, so we'll see how this feels, so just bear with me. All right, so now let's talk about Tampa. Like I said, I did not put a rating on this book, and that was because it just made me so wildly uncomfortable in so very many ways. I ended up reading this one for the Losers Club readathon, so it is included in that vlog if you would like to see my full thoughts and my reading experience while I was reading this book. What this this story is about is this woman who is 26 years old, who is a school teacher, who has a thing for 14-year-old boys. So she specifically becomes a teacher so that she can be close to 14-year-old boys, find one, groom one, and then begin a sexual relationship with one of them. That is what the story follows. It was actually inspired by something that really happened in Tampa, Florida. And from what I've read, it sounds like the author knew that person who did this. And so I can see where the author felt purpose in writing this book because of the way that case ended up playing out with what happened with that woman. The whole ordeal behind it was she was this beautiful blonde woman. And the story, when it got picked up, it sounds like what happened was trying to build this case of like, oh, that's any 14-year-old boy's dream, is that their beautiful teacher wants to sleep with them, which it's not. So I feel like in writing this book, what the author was hoping to do was put you in the mind of this teacher, who was this beautiful 26-year-old woman, and just show you how truly evil she is so that you get put in this place of extreme discomfort to understand like, oh, it doesn't matter that this person's beautiful. This is a very evil person. And that was done very effectively in this. I also think the writing of this was just pretty good. I really enjoyed the writing style. It was gripping, it kept me engaged, but it was so wildly uncomfortable. And I just really can't find myself to be in a place to recommend reading this, especially if you're a parent. I would find this really difficult to read. It's just very explicit. There are very graphic sex scenes in this story, and it's just really, really hard to stomach and get through. So not recommending. Do see what the author was doing, do think it was written well, it was wildly uncomfortable, and that is how I feel about that. Next, we'll go into a couple books that I did not really enjoy. The first one being Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I also read this one for the Losers Club Readathon, so you can see my full thoughts about it in that vlog. Someone actually just left a really kind, long comment on that video explaining the context behind Salem's Lot and why this was such a success when it came out and how people enjoyed it so much because it was King's follow-up to Carrie. After he published Carrie, it was this waiting moment of seeing what he was going to do next. Is he going to be cemented as this horror author? People didn't know. And when you're going into the story and you're following this man who's going back to his hometown where these creepy things happen, and you're trying to figure out what is the creepy thing that was happening, how this was such a surprising book because you didn't know what it was going to be, and how that is what made it so great for so many people at the time. So with that context, I can totally see why people would enjoy this and love this, but in present day and knowing what this book was going to be about and what the creature was and just the trope around it, I found it really slow and boring, and I was like waiting to get to those moments of horror. It just felt so long and so stretched out, and you get so much about the town and the town history and all the people in the town, and it just kind of meanders around to all the people in the town so much. I really wanted to follow our main character and be really close with them, and I wanted it to be very intense the whole time through, which is just not what this story is, which is fine. So I personally just didn't have the best time with Salem's Lot, but I know a lot of people do enjoy it, and it is an iconic one. So I was going to have to read it eventually, so I'm glad I read it, but personally just wasn't for me. I also know that there are multiple adaptations of this in the past. There have been TV shows and movies done. I haven't seen any of those, and I'm not particularly interested in watching those, but there is a newer movie adaptation that is coming, I believe in 2023, and that one I am interested in watching just because it's going to be newer. I'm just interested in seeing what that one does with the story, and I'm hopeful that I might enjoy that better than I did the book. Next up, I finally finished Riley Sager's Backlist by reading The Last Time I Lied. Didn't really have a good time with this one. I found it to be just very, very slow a lot of the time. What this one is about is you're following this woman who is returning back to the summer camp where something bad happened to her when she was attending there as a teen. Now she's coming back as a teacher because they're trying to reopen the camp. But when she returns, things start happening that mirror things that were happening in the past, and she's trying to figure out what happened in the past and connect to what's going on now. I like that setup. I like the camp setting. I feel like this was a good book to read in the summer, so I'm glad I read it before the summer fully ended. But the whole time, it just did feel pretty slow to me. I read this one at the beginning of the month, and I really don't remember a ton about it at this point. I do remember the ending, and I really like the twist and how this all came together, but it felt like I was waiting too long to get there, and I feel like that would have been really fun to get that twist earlier in the story to keep me more engaged in it. So this did end up being, was it my least favorite Riley Sager book that I've read? I think it might have been. I did a ranking on my TikTok where I rank all of the Riley Sager books that I've read, so you can check that out if you want on TikTok. I'm just Ashley's Little Library. But yeah, this definitely did not end up being a favorite of his for me. From this point on, everything that I'm going to talk about is books that I enjoyed and would recommend. First up, we have an arc that I read for a book that is coming out on October 11th, and that is Mistakes Were Made. This is a romance book that is about this college woman who meets this woman in a bar who's older. They end up hooking up, having having a great time, and then the next day she realizes it's her best friend's mom. That premise sounded so fun to me. I've been so intrigued for this book and been so excited to read it. I don't read a lot of romance in the year. I probably read 10 or less romances a year, but this is one that definitely made it on my radar that I was very interested in checking out, and I had such an interesting time with this book. First of all, I did not anticipate this to be as smutty as it was. This was a smutty sapphic book. So if you are looking for that, I highly recommend picking it up because it delivers on that front immediately in the beginning and it does not let up. If you're looking for a more heartfelt romance story about these two people really connecting, being really emotional with each other and really falling in love and feeling like these real humans, I would not recommend this book to you. It is definitely not that. And those are the types of romance books that I typically enjoy more. So I was kind of surprised that I had fun with this one, but it was just a more fun book. Like, it's just a romance book that you don't take very seriously, you just have fun with. There are some deeper conversations that come up throughout the story. There are some more emotional vulnerabilities that they're showing one another. But I mean, for the most part, it's a college girl banging her best friend's mom in secret. So that's what you get in this one. Next up, we have Anybody Home by Michael J. Sedlinger. This book was so kindly sent to me by my friend Marcy for my birthday. So thank you, Marcy. You are the best. I was so excited for this book. I've been so interested in it because it is a home invasion horror story that sounds like it has this interesting angle to it. So this story is written in second person and it comes from the voice of a seasoned home invader that is telling you how to perfectly execute a home invasion. That alone sounds so intriguing, and that's what really pulled me into the story, and that's what I thought was going to be so interesting about it. But I did have a journey with this one. I will be honest, I did have a journey with it. I had trouble getting into it. This is a book that I started and then I set it down to do the Losers Club readathon, and then I picked it back up a week later and then read it. And if I'm able to do that, if I'm able to sit a book down and go read like 5 other books and then come back to it, that's a sign that I wasn't super interested in it in the beginning. I had a lot of trouble getting into this writing style. It just felt so cold and detached and was difficult to connect to, despite it being written in second person, which I usually find very engaging. But the way this one was done was purposefully written that way for reasons that become impactful in the story, but it was just difficult to really fully get into. But once I got to the halfway point, I was much more engaged in this story. It is pretty short. It is only 215-ish pages long, so it did take about 100 pages, which is a chunk of change. But once I got to the halfway point, I was a lot more interested in the story and I found the ending to be a lot more engaging. I will say this is a very graphic horror novel. You're following a home invasion. There's a lot of, I don't even know if I can say this word, so I'll just put it on the screen. And that was brutal. There are some things that have been just burned into my memory from this book. Some of the imagery was just brutal. So that I think was done really well. If you're looking to be horrified, if home invasion scares you, this book will deliver on that, but it just may take you some time to get into the writing style of this one. So if you're having that experience also when you're reading it, I would really recommend just trying to get, at least 60% into the book, which sounds like a lot, but it is short. So that's only 100 and something pages, to really try to give it a chance to get into the second half, which I found more engaging. And then at the very end of this one, you sort of realize what's going on in the story. I wouldn't exactly call it a twist, but I would call it a reveal. You get this reveal about why the story was set up the way it was. And I found that to be very interesting, and it opens up discussions and great commentary around how we sensationalize things in society, like true crime. And I think that was just done really well and really interesting. So overall, I did end up enjoying the book. I do think the writing style gave it a little bit of a hindered experience for me in the beginning, but at least it saved itself by the end. Next up, we have 1922 by Stephen King. This is our novella that was the buddy read for the Losers Club readathon, so I talk about this book in that blog if you want to see my full thoughts. This is a story about this farmer in the 20s who is convincing his son to commit a crime with him, and then it follows what happens after that crime, the guilt that he faces, and just the fallout from those actions. This is another one that I had a little bit of trouble getting into the writing style. It has an older feel to it because it is set in the 20s, and I just didn't find that to be super engaging personally. But this had some of the best horror writing in it like imagery, graphic, scene wise, that was very, very effective for me that I've read in a while. So I really enjoyed those moments of horror in this one. We also ended up watching the movie adaptation on Netflix as our movie watch for the readathon. And I also thought that did a really good job of portraying the horror, and just the situation of what they get themselves into became even more horrifying in the movie, I thought, than it did in the book. But overall, I had a pretty good time with this one. The writing style just wasn't my absolute favorite thing, but the horror I thought was really good, and I just liked the way the story ended up playing out. It had so much dread in it. This is a book that just feels dreadful while you're reading it, which I always find, well, I don't know if I always find it to be fun, but when I find it fun, I do find it fun, and this one did dread very well. Speaking of books with adaptations, the next one I'm going to talk about is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I just put out a video where I read this book for the first time and then watched the movie, so you can go check that out if you missed that to see my full thoughts on this book. Overall, had a good time with it, but it wasn't a personal favorite of mine. I just didn't really fully connect with the characters. If you're unaware, this is a horror comedy, young adult coming of age type story that is really about friendship for the most part. You're mainly following these two girls, Abby and Gretchen. Gretchen ends up getting possessed, and Abby will do anything she can to try to save Gretchen. And so I did think their friendship was very beautiful and that was a very sweet story, but I just didn't get fully engaged in this book and love it like so many other people do. I do see why people would love it. I also just generally have trouble with horror comedies in the written form. I tend to enjoy that more in film and TV shows, but I talk extensively about my experience with this, how I felt about the movie, how I think the adaptation did, the differences between them, what I liked better in one versus the other. All of that is discussed in the video I just made, so definitely recommend checking that one out if you would like to hear more about this. Next up, another book that I have a dedicated vlog to is Cult Classic by Sloane Crossley. This is a book that randomly came on my radar this year. It is a literary fiction, dystopian, some kind of mystery in there type story. It's kind of hard to categorize. You're following this woman who lives in New York, and she keeps running into her exes, and she doesn't really know why, and it keeps getting weirder and weirder, and then you realize there's this bigger thing going on. As evident by the title, there is a cult element in this book, and I don't have the best history with cult books, but I did find what was going on in this one to be interesting. It wasn't your conventional cult story, because it's not like these people living on this commune, bringing people in and isolating them from their families. Like, there's a different thing going on in this, which I found to be interesting. There's lots of commentary on dating culture and whatnot, but to be honest, a little bit forgettable. Don't remember a ton about this book, but I do have a dedicated reading vlog for it because it was my 100th book that I read of the year, and 100 was my reading goal for my Goodreads challenge this year, to try to read 100 books. So I thought that would just be fun to vlog my 100th book of the year. So this was the one that it was, and there's a full vlog for it. So if you want to see my fresh memories of this book, you can go check that out. Next up, we have Ghost Eaters by Clay McLeod Chapman. This book was very kindly sent to me from Beth from Best All Books, so thank you, Beth. I was so excited for this. This was my most anticipated books of the year, mainly because the cover of it is fantastic. It did not fully end up living up to the hype that I had created for it in my mind. I was expecting this story to just be darker and more heavy and more adult, but it read kind of like a YA book to me a lot of the time, and it just wasn't as dark as I was expecting it to be in the way that I was expecting it to be. So I didn't end up loving it as much as I wanted to, but I did have a good time with it. I also listened to the audiobook of this one, which was a good experience as well, so I'd recommend the audiobook. In this story, you're following this woman named Erin, whose ex-boyfriend named Silas dies very early on in the story, and then she gets this proposal from someone to try this new drug called Ghost, which allows you to see and connect with ghosts, but it has terrible, terrible consequences, and once you take it, you can't go back. So you follow what ends up happening as she's going through all this grief and then experiencing all these bad side effects of this drug. This book ended up reminding me a lot of Summer Suns by Lee Mandelo, which I did not have the best time with. If you read that book and enjoyed it and are looking for something similar, I'd recommend picking this one up. If you read that book and didn't enjoy it and are looking for something with a similar plot but a different tone to it and writing style, then I'd recommend trying this one. There's a lot of similarities between them. Between the two of them, I didn't end up loving either of them. I love the concept of it, but Summer Suns, the writing style just didn't really work for me, and the overall tone of it didn't really work for me. And then this one, I don't know. I love young adult horror, so you wouldn't think that would bother me, but I just think it was because of my expectations. I don't think this is actually a young adult horror. I don't think it's marketed as young adult horror. I think it's marketed as adult horror. I'm actually not sure, but I think ultimately I just got too hyped for this one. I still think it was good. I still recommend recommend it, but I just didn't love it. Next up, we have an audiobook that I listened to this month, and that is The Women Fly by Megan Giddings. This was an ALC from Libro FM from a couple months ago. It came out in August, and ALC is an advanced listener copy that I've just been meaning to get around to, and I finally listened to it this month. I really love this story. I thought the writing was beautiful. I thought the message was beautiful. It was just really well done. This is a dystopian book where in this society, witches are real and there's just a lot of surveillance put around women. You very much need to have a husband to be able to do anything. If you don't get married by the age of 30, you have to submit yourself to be monitored basically by the government. So horrifying, but unfortunately quite realistic. You're following a woman named Josephine in this story who is 28 years old, so she's approaching 30. She is not married yet, but she has a lot of that pressure around her. And she also is grieving the loss of her mother who went missing a long time ago. And I think recently they decided to declare her as dead. And so she's like grieving the thought of the loss of her mother and just dealing with all these difficult things in life that she's living. But with her mother being declared as dead, she ends up getting her will, and in her mother's will she asked for Josephine to go visit this island, and so she decides to honor that request, and when she does, everything changes for her and she gets a much clearer understanding of her mother. I just really love this story. I just think it was so beautifully written. The atmosphere in it was so lush. Prose was so good. There were so many moments that I would have loved to have a physical copy just to really soak in the words. I also just think the audiobook narrator did an excellent job with this one. It really communicated the tone of the story really well and just really made it come to life. So highly recommend audiobook listening if you can for this story. But also I wish I had the physical copy. So definitely a book that I would want to get the physical copy for now, just so I can like have it on my shelves and potentially reread in the future. I just thought it was magical. I love stories about women and their mothers. Those just work for me so well. And I thought this one was just done really well as this woman's trying to understand the mysterious history of her mother and the choices her mother made and trying to understand the choices she has to make in her life. She's also a bisexual woman, so enjoyed the bisexual representation in this one as well, and overall just had a really great time with it. Next up we have Daphne by Josh Malerman. I actually was going to do a reading vlog including this book. I was going to read some horror arcs, but as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I ended up DNFing a couple, so I didn't end up bringing this reading vlog to life, but I did vlog my experience reading this book. It will just never see the light of day. This is a story about this teenage girl named Kit Lamb, and it is her last summer before she goes off to college. She is playing on the basketball team. It's a big part of her life. She has a lot of anxiety and she has a lot of fears that the local town legend ghost named Daphne is going to come kill her and her friends. So that's pretty much the setup of the story. That's pretty much what the whole story is. It's a very slow burn, very drawn out, but I thought it was really well done. I think it did a really good job personifying anxiety in this monster and building this metaphor between Kit's anxiety that she was dealing with and how this monster interacts with the world. The concept of Daphne is the more that you think about her, the more likely she is to come get you, which kind of represents the cycle of anxiety. The more you think about your anxiety, the worse it ends up being. At least that's the experience that I have with anxiety. So I thought it was really well done. I had a good time with it. I really enjoyed Josh Malerman's writing. This is the second book that I've read from him now, and I'm definitely interested to keep reading more because I've had a lot of success with his stuff so far, but I can see how this one won't be a success for everyone because it's not this fast-paced, action-y type horror thriller story. Very slow burn, but I personally really enjoyed it. Similarly, we have A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I ended up reading this one for the Losers Club Readathon, and I absolutely love this one. This was a very clear, immediate 5-star for me. I have really enjoyed everything I've read from Paul Tremblay so far. I just really love his writing style, and I do see similarities between his works and Josh Malerman's, just their writing style and the type of horror that they do. I really just like that type of psychological horror that they usually end up exploring in their works, but it is very slow. I feel like it's not as commercial horror if you think about what becomes popular and well loved by a wide audience. Like the Pallbearers Club is not getting great reception, but I loved that one. This book I thought was really well loved because this is the one that I usually hear people talk about with Paul Tremblay, and so I've been really excited to get to this one, to dive back into his backlist and read this one. But when I was reading it, or maybe when I finished it, I can't remember at what point, I went to go look at Goodreads reviews and I realized there is a lot of mixed reviews for this one. A lot of people do not like it. So I thought that was really interesting because I just loved it. I had such a good time with it. The premise of this story is that you're following these two sisters, and it's kind of similar to My Best Friend's Exorcism in some ways with the setup of the story. But you're following these two sisters who, when they were younger, one sister seemingly got possessed and it ended up becoming this big thing. This production crew came out and televised it and made it into this documentary TV show. And you're following the other sister many years later when she's being interviewed about what really happened in their family. Was she really possessed? What was it like to film the show? What was it like to live with your sister? And then there's like this mysterious element of where that all went, like what happened in the end. What's that middle piece you're missing between the filming of that and where she is now? How did we get here? What had to have happened? And you're figuring out what that was too. And I just loved it. I love the writing style. I thought it was so interesting. I love the way it was pieced together. I listened to the audiobook fully for this one. Definitely will be getting a physical copy to have on my shelves. I just had a really good time with this one. But I will say, if you're not a fan of ambiguity, I think it's going to be difficult for you to enjoy Paul Tremblay's works because he does have a lot of ambiguity packed into his works where you're like, is this happening or is this happening? And by the end, you kind of get to choose sometimes, which I find to be really fun. I think he does that really well, but I can see if that's not your thing, why you would not enjoy these. And then lastly, another book from Marcy, thank you again, is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I was really intrigued by this one because I've seen people recommend Frida McFadden's books to me in the past, and I really didn't know a lot about her. Turns out she is a Kindle Unlimited author, and she's actually a doctor, I think. I ended up looking into her. She has some kind of fancy degree. Don't remember exactly what it is, but she's got a couple different books out. They are psychological thrillers for the most part. I'm pretty sure this was a psychological thriller. And to be honest, I was not expecting to love this. I thought it was going to be cookie cutter, basic, boring, not really surprise me, not really impress me. I didn't think the writing was going to be that good of quality. I just had a lot of biases going into this book and it blew me away. I love this book. It was 5 stars. I started it and I did not stop reading until I was done. I have not fully stayed up and read a book until like 1 a.m. because I had to see what the ending was in years. Like, I don't do that, and this book made me do that. I had so much fun with it. I will say it's very simple. It is a simple setup. It is a simple thriller. It may not even be that surprising. I just thought it was executed so well. It is a book that was so engaging, so fun. I could not stop turning the pages to see what happened next, and I loved the ending of this book. I feel like the ending was just done so well. So in this story, you're following this woman who is applying to be a housemaid for this wealthy family. She doesn't have many other options. She's got to get this job. She ends up getting the job and she is becoming a live-in housemaid with them. And when she moves in, there's like some weird things going on. Like the room they have her stay in has a lock from the outside instead of the inside. And she's like, what's that about? Can I have a key to this? And the wife's like, oh yeah, totally fine. Sorry, just a weird thing with the house. We'll get you a key. Gets her a key. So you're like, maybe it's not that bad of something that's going on. But then the wife starts acting even more weird as she starts working with her. Like she'll call her to go pick up the kid from school. And then she goes to pick up the kid from school and someone else is picking her up. And she calls back and the wife's like, I never asked you to pick up the kid. So you're like, what's going on with this wife? What's going on with the family? You don't really know. And then you find out, and it was so good. And I had such a good time with this one. I really recommend it. I thought it was so fun. I mean, don't go in expecting this to be the most groundbreaking thriller with the most surprising twist you've ever seen. But if you're just looking for a fun psychological domestic thriller to keep you turning the pages and to have a really, really fun ending, then definitely one that I recommend. I think that is it for all of the books and things that I read in September. I feel like I've been talking forever. This was a huge reading month for me. I don't know if October is going to be the same. I want it to be because that would be great. But also Taylor Swift's got a new album coming out. So I'm already expecting from the 21st on to be widely occupied with me listening to that instead of audiobooks. Also, I want to watch a lot of horror movies in October just because that's always a fun thing to do. So I don't anticipate having as big of a reading month in October, but I'm hoping to have as fun of a reading month in October by not putting pressures on myself, trying to not think about star ratings and get boxed into those, and to just be able to jump around and read what I want to read. So definitely looking forward to that. Let me know down in the comments below how your reading month went in September. Let me know if you've read anything I talked about and what you thought about any of those. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye!